Welcome to the channel, people. Today we're talking decoupage, which according to Wikipedia is the art of decorating an object using glue to attach paper cutouts. The most common glue used is Mod Podge, but on furniture like larger pieces, you can use a good clear coat. For less wrinkles with thicker paper, some even use this Elmers craft bond glue. I do want to put out there that these are things that I have used, tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I do furniture art in addition to crafting, DIYs, and hand making and building things. I have tried many different realms. Just want to offer the information to you. These are not the end all be all of decoupage. If you have tips and tricks that you want to share with people, feel free to put them in the comments. Spread the love around to help people on their DIY journey. Now let's start out by talking about what you can decoupage. Decoupaging is such a versatile thing. There's almost no limit to what you can decoupage, ranging from porcelain, glass, napkins, paper, fabric, terracotta, plastic, and I think most of our favorites, wood. However, working with porcelain or glass, you may want to start off your project differently. There's no really right or wrong way. You could just throw your Mod Podge on and then apply. You could scuff up the surface with a very high grade sandpaper very mildly. You could prime it with some chalk paint or some gesso would be fine as well. Let that dry, then apply your Mod Podge and then your napkin or your paper. It really just depends on you, the DIYer who is creating the item, and which method that you want to use. I've tried all of them and they are all successful in their own way. Now let's talk about some of the materials that you can use to apply your paper onto your projects. For thicker projects, this rubber tool from Plaid is a good option. You can purchase it off Amazon, their website. An equal one is this plastic tool from Cricut. If you own a Cricut, many of you probably own this tool. If you do not own this tool, you can use a nice little tumbling block from Dollar Tree or any wood item that has like a little soft edge to it. A big do for me and a trick of mine is a soft dry sponge for thinner papers like rice paper, gift wrapping, napkins, and such things like that. And for a really good clean finish, you're going to want to use your iron to make sure you minimize as many wrinkles as possible. It really just depends on the look that you're going for. There is no right or wrong way to minimize wrinkles. There are some tips and tricks, which we are going to do in our demonstration part, which is, you know, we're working on it. If you don't want to watch this aspect where I'm just kind of giving you some information, I did timestamp the video. You can pick up fabric from virtually anywhere. Even Dollar Tree's selling it these days fairly cheap. We're going to use this one from Walmart for a demonstration in a little bit. And paper, this is from Hobby Lobby. It was under $1. Sometimes they have sales where you can pick up more than one for $1. This is a fairly thinner paper. It's not as thick as some of theirs. This is a Tim Holtz. This is a little bit more pricier on a budget. The paper is really thin. We will not be using this today, but I'm just kind of showing you the different types of paper you can decoupage with. We will be using this gift wrapping paper, which is very similar in texture and size to the Tim Holtz paper, and you can purchase this off Amazon or find really gift wrap paper anywhere that you love. Napkin, which is my favorite part of this. In case you're not familiar with me, I love napkins. I have a napkin problem. So, okay. With napkins, it's always important to remove that sneaky back 2 layers, and I've had some subbies offer some tips and tricks. The first one is to take 2 pieces of painter's tape, put it on the back and the front, and look, it peels off. How magnificent is this? This is me doing the second sneaky layer. Now, I wasn't being extra careful with this because I'm just kind of showing you that it really works. Thank you for those of you who have told me about this. Love it. The second one is taking some Mod Podge, putting a tiny bit on your finger, and then you're going to just rub that Mod Podge between your 2 fingers. This is a completely different napkin, so you don't think I'm using the same one. And then just smoosh it together to grab, and look, it works too. It came off. So both of these little tips and tricks work to get those sneaky layers off. The days of this where I'm struggling to peel it off my fingers or some tweezers are now over. You're welcome. Now, let's move on to last. We're gonna also do some washi tape. In one of my recent videos, someone was like, wow, you do washi tape? Yeah, you can do washi tape too. For our demonstration part of this, we're going to be using mostly these wood slats from Walmart. They also sell a version of this at Dollar Tree. We're also going to be demonstrating on a palette and a porcelain piece. For all the bonds, I'm going to use the Mod Podge, and most people take a paintbrush and dip it in there. I do too when it gets close to the bottom, but I don't always do that because, you know, dog hair and bits. So I went to Crafter Square, Dollar Tree, picked up this little glue bottle, transferred the Mod Podge into the glue bottle after I emptied the glue bottle, and now I use that to kind of squeeze my Mod Podge out. Since we're gonna have to wait for this iron-on method to dry because you need a lot of Mod Podge, we're going to start with this first. And I'm just going to take our Mod Podge in our little glue bottle, squeeze a hefty amount all over our little slat, paintbrush it on, and then we're going to just let this dry. Usually I let this dry for about an hour. Thin layer of Mod Podge will dry roughly well enough in 30 minutes, but this is going to be extra thick. See how thick and clumpy it is? We're gonna just leave this to hang out and go off and continue on our other projects. We're gonna start off with the napkin. Now I'm just gonna rip this apart and we're gonna put half on one and half on the other. You know, I'm just demonstrating here, okay? Bear with me. So for our first one, we're gonna use my favorite way, and that's with the sponge. Now, what you don't see me do a lot is the time and gentle way I go about this. I do furniture art as well, and I sell things. So if you want to make sure you're taking special time and care in your pieces to have minimal wrinkles and look as high-end or professional as possible, this will give you that look. I always do a very thin layer of the Mod Podge. You are basically creating an adhesive. That's it. This does not have to be an inch thick to create this look, and you go piece by piece and little section by little section, and it will turn out beautiful almost every single time. I personally love doing this just because it also, with using the sponge, when you're smashing it down there, it's helping that Mod Podge to pull up through that napkin. And if your sponge gets that Mod Podge on there, it's not a big deal. But look how beautiful this is. There's a tiny bit of wrinkles, which is fine. I like wrinkles. There's nothing wrong with that. It also gives it a vintage look. But overall, the color of the napkin is still very dominant. It has not dissipated, and it is not covered in wrinkles. This may be what some of you do and may see a lot of other creators do, and there's nothing wrong with this. It works just fine. But a lot of times people will cover their entire project with the Mod Podge and then lay their stuff down. And the damage at that point is already done if you're worried about bubbles and wrinkles, because once you start laying this napkin down over that load that you just poured all over your piece, you can't really take it back with a napkin. It's different with paper, but with a napkin, it's kind of hard to take it back because you can start to rip it. So you're kind of just pat it down, find a tool that is not wood or really hard. Sometimes I just use my finger when I do this. I love doing this for vintage pieces because it gets that wrinkly old look. It's a stunning way to accomplish that. If you're worried about your wrinkles and you're doing this, this might be why. See how there is bunching and wrinkling, and in this one there is not. It's a very smooth, minimal wrinkle. And also, if you look on the right, the napkin, the color is kind of fading away. Also, look how the napkin's kind of disintegrating. So this is almost dry. They've literally been drying about the same amount of time. So thin layer of Mod Podge can give you that adhesion, and it can give you a very nice, quick way to do this. heavier, takes longer. It will also help your napkin lose color and create bubbles. Again, the one on the right is an amazing way to get that vintage look, but look how dry this is. We're gonna start now with our iron piece. This is all dry and you can hardly even tell that Mod Podge is on there. This stuff is so cool. I love Mod Podge. I already cut my napkin down to size basically, and we're going to just flatten this baby out. Make sure your iron is heated it up, and you want to put a piece of wax paper in between. I didn't because I'm that confident in the napkin, but use a piece of wax paper to go in between your napkin and your iron. I just knew that this napkin was thick enough it could handle what I was doing. I'm not going to bore you to death and explain how to iron. Most of you know how to just smash that thing down onto something and then just iron it out because that's all we're doing. There's no technique in there, no technique in your stroke. But look at it, the napkin has its color, it's beautiful, it is flawless, and it's on here. Oh, the camera's a little blurry. All right, there we go. So it's on there. This is why you also want to make sure you have a nice thick layer of the Mod Podge around the edge. So see how I'm just tugging on that, and that quick it adhered to this little slat. Love this method. So here, going back over our little pieces, here is the extra where we poured our Mod Podge on there and we just dabbed it on down. You can get a vintage look with this. And here's my favorite one with the sponge, just kind of like a little mix of both. Now, here is a technique that I use to get off edges when I'm doing my furniture and stuff like that to get a very flawless look. Paintbrush, a little bit of water on the edge with a light sandpaper block, and then that's it. It's that quick. I'm not speeding this up. It happened. It's all gone. That's it. A lot of times people will see me use X-Acto knife in my videos. I've had people comment about it. The X-Acto knives can be a little bit time consuming. I use them a lot with palettes or to get around little edges with things. There are many different ways of doing this. Personally, the easiest is the water. If you don't use the water, see how there's some fraying here and you just use a sandpaper, you can fix that easily by then taking your block and then going down the piece, and it gets all the little frayed pieces off. Again, it depends on the look. If you're going for a vintage look, you want frayed bits around the edges or even farmhouse stuff. So using a lower grit sandpaper like 100 or 120, it's going to rough it up very much for you than using a higher grit with the 220 where it's very fine, where you'll get a very precise edge. So it really just depends on the look that you're going for when you're trying to get rid of your excess napkin. If I was going for that vintage look with this piece, I'd then take some Antique Waverly wax and kind of go over these little wrinkles and these little, you know, parts where the napkin kind of disappeared. I've recently had some subbies mention a burn method for getting excess napkin off, and I don't remember the name of the channel, but I looked into it. It is just not for me. I have actually in the past on some furniture pieces burned napkin and then applied it on there. There's just, you know, too many things and variables in there that worry me, like when I did that, so I haven't done it since. And, you know, to each their own. If it works for you, it works for you. By all means, do what makes you fuzzy inside. I really like the water with the paintbrush, and that's just my personal preference. But for those of you that mentioned it, I love ideas and I love being able to try them or have the options, and I'm sure most of you do too, so thank you very much. For your washi tape, you're kind of going to use its own adhesive to get you started. You just want to place it where you want it, use your finger to press it all in there really well, cut your edges, trim everything up. You can use scissors, X-Acto knife, box cutter, whatever you want to trim it up how you want it to be trimmed. And then you're going to come back in and hit it with your Mod Podge. You're going to, and in case I didn't mention that, you're going to hit everything, your paper, your napkins, with your Mod Podge when you're all done. You're going to go over it just like this, a complete nice layer. You can layer it as much as you want, but this is going to really seal in everything from the outside in and make sure it doesn't move. For the paper, I cut one of those slats in half, and we're gonna do one with our Elmers glue stick, and then we're going to do the other one with the Mod Podge. And you put a healthy layer, you can't hurt nobody with this glue stick. Lather it on up and then press it on there. I've done this a couple times and have actually not had any issues with wrinkling or peeling or lifting. It doesn't get gooey like the Mod Podge if you layer it heavy, so it's very nice to just kind of rub on there really well. You want to make sure you go over this with your Mod Podge. The only reason we're using the Elmer's glue is to minimize the bubbles and the wrinkles, and it will adhere to your piece. I don't know if it's going to work with all things, but like if you're using like, I don't know, foam board or, you know, MDF or wood, it definitely, the Elmer's glue should work for that as well. For the one where we're using the Mod Podge, less is more, okay? Do not need a lot of Mod Podge. The more Mod Podge you have between your paper and your object is going to create bubbles. So a little bit is fine. Smush out as much as you can, and then you come back and trim off all your edges once it's dry. Again, all the pieces are not going to be the same. They're not going to be exactly square. They're not going to be exactly triangle. So you'll have to take what I'm telling you and apply it as best you can to your project. This is a little trick I use, is to flip it the opposite way when I can, and then take the X-Acto knife and trim off all the edges as precise as possible. And then I'll go back over it with, for paper, I like to use a 180 or more. I'm just using whatever sandblock I have for the sake of the video currently, but paper is a little bit thicker, so you do not have to use a higher grit to minimize your edges like with the napkin. So you could use a lower grit sandpaper like a 120 or a 150, but always make sure you go over it with your Mod Podge to seal in everything really, really well. Here's our little porcelain piece. I just had a small, I like tiny things, so I hoard little stuff like this. Did not sand or anything. The only thing I'm doing to prep this is just putting a little bit of Mod Podge on it. I had another napkin laying around, you know I did. And I took all the sneaky layers off, and then I'm just gonna use my sponge to just form it on the little porcelain piece, and that is all we are doing. And then I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge over the top of this, and this is fairly simple, just to do a little porcelain. The fabric to me is one of the most simple because you don't have it like trying to run away from you. You can stretch it out. There's really no harm done. Again, I do the same thing with this that I do with the napkin, and do little by little by little. So I put a little bit of Mod Podge and then I apply the fabric. The cool thing with this is it does work like a napkin, where the product actually smooshes into the fabric. So it's pretty cool. It gets really stiff, and I appreciate how smooth the fabric usually turns out. Also, you can use a harder tool like the Cricut, where it's plastic, to really make sure you're smoothing that out with the process. You do not have to be as gentle with the fabric as you do the other things. So the way I like to think of decoupage is, if you're a beginner and you just want to try it, go for the fabric because you can get a feel for it. It's really the only product out of all of these that has some give in it, and you don't have to be exactly precise. Now, if you want some practice with like tearing and painting and different things like that, try the paper, and be mindful of how much Mod Podge you're applying as you go, because the more will cause the paper to wrinkle up. Napkins I would save for last, because if you're putting them on your projects, you can really destroy them quickly. And last, we are going to put on our gift wrapping paper. This stuff is fairly thin. I'm going to do this a few ways just to give you some examples. First, I'm going to put this on very lightly with a little bit of Mod Podge, like I would, like for real, this is how I would start this. Press it on and then take the sponge and apply it. And what's so great, see the little wrinkles? You can actually really take the sponge and manipulate the paper and the Mod Podge and get the wrinkles out, not ripping your paper, because the sponge allows you to apply pressure, but it's so gentle on the surface. This is something that I do on occasion. I use a little tumbling block. So I'm putting roughly the same amount of Mod Podge on there using a tumble block, and then we're just going to press down. And this is going to work. It's not going to rip. There's not going to be any issues. You should be able to do this as well with another wood piece that has rounded edges. But you can see there are minimal wrinkles compared to where the sponge is. Now you can also, if you do that while it's still wet, take your sponge and rub to get those wrinkles off, because the sponge will allow you to manipulate the paper. So as you can see, it really takes it out. There are still minimal wrinkles, but it's not that bad. Now lastly, I'm going to apply the same amount of Mod Podge, and then we're going to take our plastic or Cricut tool and just apply light pressure, but it rips. And that's because the harder the tool is when you're trying to apply a paper or something really thin, it will just go right through. Here are the 3 finished products now that everything has dried: our iron, our sponge, and our dabbing with a lot of Mod Podge. Our iron is pretty flawless, as I said before, with very, very, very minimal anything. And then our sponge kind of gives you that blend where you got maybe a wrinkle or two, but it allows you play using the sponge with no tearing, as long as you're careful with the way that you're pulling. And our dabbing with a lot of Mod Podge is going to give you more of a vintage type style feel. This really just depends on how you like crafting or DIYing and creating your pieces. Hopefully this information is helping you. I've had a lot of subbies ask a lot of questions, and hopefully going into detail more with this video gives some answers. This is our washi tape and our little porcelain piece. And yeah, I know you're like, Brandy, this washi tape, it had sticker. Listen, it matters. Trust me, if you put the Mod Podge over the top of it, that washi tape's not coming off of there. So it's just gonna give it that finish. The porcelain piece turned out super cute. I should finish this off, like add some little things. What do you guys think? This so cute with a little bird on it. Anyhow, love that, love it. This is our pretty gift wrap paper, and look how nice it is now that it's all dry. Now as we go up the little piece, you can see the wrinkling from using the other tools that weren't the sponge. Again, there's no right or wrong way with the tools that you choose. The look is your look. These ideas are to help you. You use what do's and what don'ts you want. And personally, to me, I always feel like the fabric just gives you the most flawless finish, and I think that's because the Mod Podge is able to really sink in there. Look at me taking my nail, showing you like it's not coming off there. It's really on this project, and this is with me only going over the fabric once with the Mod Podge. It's super on there, and it's just a very flawless finish. And last but certainly not least, and one of my second favorites next to the napkin to do, is the paper. And either one of these ways work. Just remember, less is more, and the more Mod Podge you use, you'll have like some wrinkling and stuff like that, and it's always important to go over your paper around your edges to seal in all that Mod Podge, go over the top. It will not move. It'll stay in place once it's all dry. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, people. I hope this little do's and don'ts of how to decoupage helped you out. You learned something that you might not have known, or, you know, got some entertainment out of it, if nothing else. Until next time, people.